Back in my series on the model prayer, as I was going through that, I raised some questions and said I would deal with them later, and I'm getting around to doing that in the last video and this one. And both of those questions come from Matthew chapter 6, verse 12, where it says, "And forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors." I looked in the last video at this idea. If I have to ask God for forgiveness, does that mean I'm not forgiven? And also brought in 1 John 1:9, and we said no and explained that. You can go back and look at it. But, the second part of that, forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors, seems to tie our forgiveness to forgiving others. And then when you look a verse down, skip over 13, go to 14 and 15, Jesus says, now the prayer has ended. He says, "For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses." Well, I said when it comes to this idea of we need to ask God for forgiveness after every time we sin, that verse is misunderstood, just like 1 John 1:9. Oh, what about this one? This seems to say if I don't forgive others, I won't be forgiven by God. Is this misunderstood? I don't think so. I think this means exactly what it says, what it sounds like. There's other passages that put forth the same idea. One of the key ones is a parable. It's called the parable of the unforgiving servant or the unmerciful servant. And, it's an interesting one. A king calls in his officials to settle accounts. And there's one person who owes him. And Jesus uses this outrageous figure of 10,000 talents. From what we can tell, a talent is about a year's wage or more. So 10,000 years' wages. And so, imagine, you could never repay that back. And the person begs to have more time to pay it back, and the king just forgives him, cancels the debt. Well, then that person who was forgiven by the king goes out and sees someone who owes him 100 denarii, and a denarii was about a typical day's wage. And so much less. And he says, "Pay me what you owe me." And the person who owes him 100 denarii says the exact same words, "Please give me more time and I'll pay you back." But that servant, the first one, refuses. He has that second servant thrown in jail until he can pay off the debt. Well, word gets back to the king, and then in Matthew 18, verse 32, it says, "Then his master," I've been saying a king, a master, "summoned him and said to him, 'You wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. And should you not have had mercy on your fellow servant as I had mercy on you?' And in anger, his master delivered him to the jailers until he should pay all his debt. So also," here's the comment on this, "my heavenly Father will do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother from your heart." I don't see any other way to explain this, interpret this, other than to say if we absolutely refuse to forgive someone, we will not be forgiven by God. It doesn't matter what we've done to become a Christian. It doesn't matter that Christ paid the penalty and this and that. We won't receive that. Now, someone might say, is this salvation by works then? Do I have to earn my salvation by forgiving? No, you don't earn your salvation by forgiving someone, but you can spurn your salvation. You can reject your salvation by refusing to forgive someone. Well, why is that? Well, why would that be? How does it even make sense? And the parable there definitely shows one side of it, that we've been forgiven by the master, in our case, God, of just an insurmountable debt. Anything that others do to us, and don't take me wrong, other people can do heinous things to us or others. But again, compared to what we've done to God, who's never done anything wrong, who created us to have this relationship, again, the amounts are just so far apart. We need to realize that. And if we don't show forgiveness, to some degree, we haven't truly accepted forgiveness. But the other side of this, that I think the reason that this sin is set off refusing to forgive, it's our witness. In John chapter 17, and it's funny, this all started with the model prayer, and I make the point, it should be called the model prayer, not the Lord's Prayer. The true Lord's Prayer is in John 17. Verses 20 to 21 are part of that, where Jesus says, after praying for his 12, he says, I do not ask for these only, but also for those who will believe in me through their word. So every one of us who has become a Christian as a result of their ministry and on through the thousands of years, that they may all be one. Talking about believers, that we may all be one, just as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be in us. And then the reason for this, this is Jesus' prayer, and it's so important, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. Our unity as believers directly impacts the effectiveness of our witness. For us to say there's a God who sent His Son to reconcile us to Him, and as part of that, it just makes sense. Going back to the idea, well, if that has happened, if we've received forgiveness, we should be open to forgiving anyone who's sinned against us, who's wronged us. Well, if we don't, then it makes people wonder, well, is the rest of it true? Is anything about this true? You know, those people, they don't show any, the change you would expect if someone's been forgiven to show forgiveness. And so by refusing to forgive, we're putting ourselves, our desire not to forgive, our bitterness, whatever it is, we're putting it before the salvation of other people to the extent that we're jeopardizing the salvation of other people. You see why that's so serious? I believe that's why it talks about this. Where you see this idea of refusing to forgive, it makes it clear. We then are rejecting God's forgiveness. Now, you've heard me say, as I've gone through this and been real clear, it's refusing to forgive. I will not. I'm not going to. Don't care what God says. No. Versus struggling to forgive. If someone did something to us that really hurt us, and it's hard to let go. Now, there's a difference between, okay, I know I should and I want to, and I will get there, and now maybe I'm there, but it still comes to mind. All of that. I remember a sermon that I heard as a kid. 3 tests, so to speak, of truly forgiving someone is I don't bring it up to a third party. I don't bring it up to the person who sinned against me, and I don't dwell on it in my own mind. I can't keep it from coming there, but I don't have to dwell on it. I can change my thoughts. And then, along with that, I've got to let them know I do forgive you. And be honest. I know it's not easy. It's not difficult. It's not that there's times it doesn't affect me. All of that is different than I just will not do it. If we are at that point, I just will not forgive someone, the Bible, there's no way around it. We will not be forgiven. So please understand this. Please share this with anyone that it might affect directly, because I don't know that everyone understands this. I don't know that everyone knows this, even though it's there and should be clear.